Hello, this is David with Signs from Heaven. I want to talk about 9 warning signs that happened from 2013 to 2015 that are affecting what we're seeing today in 2020. We had 4 blood moons that happened consecutively, full total lunar eclipses, and they each happened on an appointed time of the Bible. First of all, that is pretty rare. You can have 4 blood moons happening consecutively once every 55 years. To have those line up with biblical appointed times, that's every 250 years. But then you add 5 more signs. You add a comet, you add an asteroid, you add a close approach of Saturn. We had 9 signs in a 2-year period. All of them considered warning signs. Something was up, and we're just now seeing it in 2020. So let's take a look back at the signs and what they were warning us about. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years." When you see a sign occurring on an appointed time, you are looking at the signature of God. During a 2-year period, beginning in November 2013, we experienced 9 heavenly signs, including 4 blood moons, with each occurring on an appointed time from the Bible. A stellar sign that appears on an appointed time is, by biblical definition, a message from God. It is, however, not always easy to figure out what that message is at the moment that it happens. Now that we've had some time to look back at the events and what happened during the season, we can piece together a message that was so dire that it took 9 warning signs to tell us. The first sign was a comet. Comets have historically been seen as warnings of destruction or judgment. This Chinese silk manuscript from the Western Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BC is the first definitive atlas of comets ever discovered. Each comet is drawn as they saw it along with the corresponding event that it warned about, such as the death of the prince, the coming of the plague, or the 3-year drought. So the first sign was a warning from a comet. Comet ISON reached perihelion with the sun on Hanukkah, November the 28th, 2013. This day marked the closest that the comet's path would take it towards the sun. This comet, however, didn't make it. It was destroyed the very same day as the sun broke it up into millions of pieces. This all happened in the Scorpius constellation, the scorpion being a symbol of the power of the enemy, as Yeshua described in Luke 10:19. The second sign was a blood moon, which is a total lunar eclipse. Historically, solar and lunar eclipses have been seen as bad omens. The Babylonians saw eclipses as warnings of the sure death of the king. We have a couple of examples from the Bible that connect eclipses with divine judgment. In Joel, it says, "The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yehovah." And in Revelation it says, "I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as a sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood." The first blood moon occurred just hours after Passover at the beginning of the 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread on April 15th, 2014. This blood moon appears to have been warning us about some major events that were already set in motion. The escalation of a U.S.-led proxy war in Syria meant to block a Syrian-Iranian gas pipeline, a Russian response to the U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine designed to force the country to align with the EU instead of Russia, and an accelerated de-dollarization by Russia and the BRICS countries as Western financial dominance started to wane. However, this blood moon signaled more than just a couple of international skirmishes. This was the beginning of a new era, the final season before the returning of Yeshua for a millennial reign. This was the time for the end-time characters in Bible prophecy to be revealed. The third sign was most unusual, an asteroid. But not just an ordinary asteroid, a 1,100-foot-long rock nicknamed the Beast. Asteroid 2014 HQ-124 made its closest flyby of the Earth on Pentecost, June 8th of 2014. This same day, Pope Francis had invited Israeli President Shimon Peres and the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to the Vatican for an afternoon of prayer on Pentecost. The Pope's initiative took everyone by surprise, just like the asteroid, which was only discovered 45 days earlier. Asteroid 2014 HQ-124 made its closest pass by Earth at 3¼ lunar distances away, just 1 hour before the historical Pentecost event at 9 a.m. Israeli time would occur. This mysterious beast asteroid appears to have been eerily revealing the identity of the second beast spoken in Revelation 13. The second beast is a religious leader. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he deals with worship. He's religious. The ominous role of Pope Francis in the last days has also been foretold by an ancient prophecy that has been highly esteemed within the Catholic Church. Saint Malachy, from 1094 to 1148, was an Irish saint and the Archbishop of Armagh during the 12th century. While he was in Rome in 1139, he had a vision showing him the final 112 popes from his day up until the end. Saint Malachy wrote down a short phrase describing the characteristics that he saw about each of these 112 popes. Pope Francis just happens to be Pope number 112, the last pope on his list. Here's what St. Malachy wrote. "In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will reign Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock among many tribulations, after which the 7-hilled city, which is implied to be Rome, the seat of the Vatican, will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge the people." Incidentally, there was more than one beast that raised its head during this infamous Week of the Beasts. 4 days before the second beast was revealed, the first beast revealed his 7 heads. On June the 4th through the 5th, the G7 met in Brussels, Belgium. Now, for the last 16 years, this group called itself the G8, and they were scheduled to meet in Sochi, Russia in 2014. However, Russia refused to go along with a U.S.-orchestrated coup designed to sever Ukrainian and Russian commerce and instead integrate Ukraine with the European Union. So 2 months before the Sochi meeting, the G7 made a quick decision to meet instead in Brussels, Belgium, and they kicked Russia out of their group. Notice that even though the group calls itself the G7, there are 9 people in this picture. That is because the 2 European Union presidents have been silent members since 1981. The EU Council President and the EU Commission President are simply vassals of the United States and the United Kingdom, and they go along with the consensus of the 7 heads. Russia had been a member of the G8 since 1998, but now the group reverted back to calling itself the G7. The 7 heads of the beast were revealing their true nature. And in reality, the 7 heads were always the ones making the global macroeconomic decisions, even when Russia was politely considered to be the 8th member. The ministerial track for finance continued to meet as the G7, even as the leaders and foreign ministers convened as the G8 when Russia was there. The book of Revelation chapter 13 begins by mentioning a first beast 10 verses before the second beast enters the picture. So it's fitting that we should expect to see the first beast revealed 4 days earlier than the second. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns. Look at this photo of the G8 summit in 2013 and note that there were indeed 7 heads and 10 horns. The 7 heads are the 7 largest International Monetary Fund, or IMF, members with the most advanced economies. The 10 horns are the sum total of 10 leaders that meet together with the G7. However, the 3 additional leaders do not necessarily represent the next 3 advanced economies, but rather have a unique relationship with the G7, such as the European Union, or in the case of Russia, a very strong military. If we look at the description of the 10 horns in the book of Daniel and compare that with the description of the 7 heads in the book of Revelation, we get a clue that 3 of these horns reside on the same head. Daniel says, 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And in Revelation, it says, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. So it appears that the 3 horns that were plucked out, they were plucked out of the head that was mortally wounded. They all were on the same head. Out of the 7, there is one head which perfectly fits this description. The United States. In this picture from 2018, we see President Trump with the 2 European Union representatives, Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, and Donald Tusk, President of the European Council. The USA has maintained a close relationship with the EU since its official foundation in 1993 as a result of the Maastricht Treaty. However, the United States was covertly encouraging the formation of a European Union as early as 1950. And today, the U.S. has maintained control over the EU by dishing out tons of money. It's much easier to control a couple of presidents than 28 individual countries. Therefore, this ominous revelation gives us the implication that the USA will be the head that is mortally wounded. It says again in Revelation, and I saw one of his heads, as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. The January 1988 edition of The Economist magazine echoes this same theme. Apparently, it has long been a plan of the globalists to crash the U.S. economy and bring down all the world's fiat currencies with it, and then to raise up from the ashes a new world currency. The phoenix is a mythical, beautiful bird that rises up to live again from the ashes. However, in the Economist rendition, It will be an eagle wearing a new world currency called the Phoenix. And apparently the plan was to have this occur around the year etched on this coin, 2018. Their plan is to have the eagle live on forever, dominating the global economy. In the book of Revelation, the Apostle John gives us a second description of the beast, this time focusing on the details about the 7 heads. And here again, we see the dominant head being replaced by the beast himself. John's second description of the beast. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, which are economies, on which the woman, the United States, or Mystery Babylon, sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have bowed down, 1 is standing, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The amazing thing that John reveals here is that the 5 of the kings are unwillingly submitting to the woman who sits above them all, the United States. It is easy to see that since World War II, the USA has maintained military bases and control over the countries that it conquered, Germany, Italy, and Japan. So these countries are still bowing down in submission. Canada answers to the wishes of the United States and the United Kingdom. France also reluctantly submits to the United States policies, since it was devastated and had to recover from World War II, and like Germany and Italy, it gave up its control of its currency and economy over to the European Union. Only one king is standing on its own, the United Kingdom. They never gave up control of their currency, the pound sterling, and now they have completely even left the European Union. London has the world's largest international financial center, called the City of London, which is a district covering a square mile area. It hosts 37% of the world's currency transactions, involving derivatives, asset management, insurance, and investment banks. John has now described 6 of the 7 kings, but continues by skipping over to the 8th king, the beast himself. And the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th. Well, what about the 7th king? Why does he leave him out? The reason is because the 7th king is the woman who sits above all the other kings, the United States. The woman is counted as one of the 7. The United States is both the 7th king and the great harlot, Mystery Babylon, as it says in Revelation, and is of the 7 and is going to perdition. Why does John now say that the 8th king is one of the 7 kings? This is because the 8th king, the beast himself, will uproot the horns and mortally wound the 7th head, which is the United States. With the USA out of the way, the beast becomes the new 7th king and the one sitting on top of all the others. As of 2018, the G7 nations controlled 45% of the world's gross domestic product, or GDP. Adding the 24 other European Union nations brings the G7 controlled economies to 52% of the world's GDP. And the one sitting on top of all the others, producing nearly 1/4 of the world's total goods and services, is the United States. The G7 controls 61% of the world's total wealth. And the one sitting on top of them all, with nearly 1/3 of the world's total wealth, is the United States. The G7 controls 93% of the world's reserve currencies, meaning the 7 heads totally dominate international trade. And the one sitting on top of them all, controlling nearly 2/3 of the international trade, is again the United States. And as for the missing 10th horn, President Trump is now considering inviting Russia back into the group in 2020. The warnings continued with the second blood moon on the Eve of Tabernacles in October the 8th of 2014. then a total solar eclipse on the eve of the biblical New Year on March the 20th, 2015, and then the third blood moon at the Feast of Unleavened Bread on April the 4th, 2015. By this time, it had become apparent that something was seriously wrong in Europe. The continent was being invaded by Muslim migrants. However, this was not your normal group of migrants with the demographics of people displaced by war or natural catastrophe. Many do not seem to have left in a hurry. Many brought their new high-end smartphones and large sums of cash, 10 or 20,000 euros. Many had no passports, no ID, and refused to even give fingerprints. Now, when people flee to survive, the men come with their families, women, children, and elders. But here, instead, 75% of these migrants were young, fit males. There were very few women, children, or elders. This is not the makeup of a population escaping for their lives. This is the demographics you would expect to see for an army. And the destination for these migrants was only Western Europe, nowhere else. From 2014 to 2017, Europe's illegal immigrants doubled from 2.5 to 5 million. The central hub, accepting the massive infusion, was Germany. From there, over half the immigrants were ferried away to other European nations, especially Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. This was a coordinated invasion. During 2015 alone, Germany reported an increase of 1.2 million migrants. Markus Mahler, a reporter from Kop Verlag, noted in an article, just one look at the flight schedule for August the 8th, 2016 shows that from 12:30 midnight, the rush hour begins. Airplanes from Turkey and Greece land almost every minute. The intensive landing continues throughout the night and ends only around 6 in the morning. In Sweden, it was no different. They acted as a secondary hub for the invasion. Peter Springer, a local detective, accused the Swedish authorities of covering up a massive crime wave among primarily African and Middle Eastern migrants, and declared that in Sweden, even the truth can get you jailed for hate speech. U.S. House Representative Michelle Bachmann described it as a planned invasion for the purpose of destroying Western Christendom. She emphasized that you do not see this mass migration into Russia or into China. It's all headed toward Western Christendom. Milos Zeman, the Czech president, declared that the Muslim Brotherhood was using migrants as an invasion force to seize control of Europe. He explained that the Brotherhood lacked the resources to launch a military invasion, so was sending waves of migrants as an alternative force. And if you expected the Pope to offer any objection to this invasion, you would have been wrong. Just the opposite. The Pope told the French newspaper La Croix, the Cross, that he dreaded hearing about the Christian roots of Europe because they take on colonialist overtones. He encouraged the European nations to integrate the Muslims into their continent. Besides, he said, this integration is all the more necessary today since as a result of selfish search for well-being, Europe is experiencing the grave problem of a declining birth rate. The Pope was parroting the United Nations' previously stated objectives to force Europe to become multicultural. They were all in on it together, and the blood moons were sending out an alarm to anyone who would take notice. The next sign was the closest approach of Saturn to the Earth during all of 2015. It happened on the eve of Pentecost, May the 23rd. And wouldn't you know it, the planet that symbolizes Lucifer and Satan was warning about some more shenanigans from the Vatican. On June the 26th, 2015, the Vatican signed a treaty with the State of Palestine. Although a State of Palestine does not currently exist, the Vatican was siding with the United Nations, who had voted to approve a de facto recognition of a sovereign Palestinian state on November the 29th, 2012. What is noteworthy is that the UN, the Pope, and the Vatican seem to be joined at the hip on all policies. Their agreement is called the Comprehensive Agreement between the Holy See and the State of Palestine, and it supports the establishment of all relevant United Nations resolutions towards Palestine and a creation of a viable state of Palestine on the basis of the pre-1967 borders, including East Jerusalem. In case you might think that this agreement is from the goodness of the Vatican's heart to support an oppressed people, read on. Chapter 5. Freedom of Worship and Sacred Places. It gives away the true intentions for the treaty. It states, the Catholic Church shall freely exercise her authority and canonical jurisdiction in all holy places, shrines, churches, chapels, cemeteries, and other sacred places, religious houses, and clerical residences. In exchange for backing a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Vatican was securing the rights to control the Temple Mount in East Jerusalem. This now gives them control over any rebuilt Third Temple. I think we all know where this is going. The next sign was a bit ominous. A partial solar eclipse on the eve of the Feast of Trumpets, September 13th of 2015. The Feast of Trumpets only has one objective, to sound an alarm to wake up. All the other appointed times have an explicit reason to be observed, but the Bible doesn't state any specific reason to observe trumpets. Just blow the trumpets to sound an alarm. 10 days later, the Pope made a rare visit to the United States and became only the third Pope to visit the White House. He then gave a first ever papal address to a joint session of Congress the next day. However, the real reason for his visit was to be on site at the United Nations the day after to encourage the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for a one-world government, controlled, of course, by the United Nations. The 2030 Agenda basically puts the control of all natural resources in the United Nations' hands. And not just natural resources, but people too. The UN wants to control where people live, how much energy they consume, under the guise of protecting the environment from getting hot. It denies everyone except the elite access to the most plentiful forms of energy, oil, coal, and gas. It declares that carbon, an essential plant and human nutrient, is a toxic emission. This chokes out the green plant life that the UN purports to protect. But most importantly, it denies the advancement of the poor, who will never be able to afford the new green energy, which is so inefficient to produce that it costs more than naturally occurring oil, gas, and coal. The 2030 Agenda gives the UN the power to reallocate resources, that is, steal resources, from one nation and give it to another. It is the same recipe that former socialist governments have managed to implement, but this time on a global scale. Pope Francis encouraged the UN General Assembly to adopt his plan for a one-world government by saying, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the World Summit, which opens today, is an important sign of hope. I am similarly confident that the Paris Conference on Climate Change will secure fundamental and effective agreements. Right after the Pope's speech, the 193 nations represented at the United Nations General Assembly unanimously adopted Resolution 71, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 2 days later, a final blood moon beckoned to the world what had just happened. On the Feast of Tabernacles, September the 28th of 2015. And 3 months later, the Pope got his second wish, a global tax on carbon emissions at the Paris Climate Conference. The Paris Agreement saw 195 countries adopt the first ever universal, legally binding global climate deal to limit the rise in global temperatures to less than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial levels. Looking back at the 2030 Agenda, there is an ominous provision that is hidden in the Sustainable Development Goal number 16.9. And it reads like this. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. As we'll see in the next video, this will be the mark of the beast.